may feel he's found the end of his road. The path he chose is just one of the paths people who wish to change their gender travel. By the end of today alone, 4 more people will have sex change operations. That's 1,000 a year. But not everyone chooses to have surgery. Many people who, like Renee, feel they were born looking like the opposite sex choose to take hormones, but do not go on to surgery. Why do they feel they were born into the wrong bodies? Is it in their chromosomes, their hormones? Is it due to some emotional event, or is it simply nature creating a third gender, a natural alternative? Whatever the reason, whatever path they choose, why are they subjected to such prejudice and hardship? These are just some of the questions we'll tackle today. I'm Dr. Bruce Hensel. With me are Jameson Green, one of the world's leading experts in female-to-male transgenders, and you are a female-to-male transgender. You had surgery, correct?
That is correct.
We also have Nick Adams from the Gay and Lesbian Alliance Against Defamation, who is an FTM, female-to-male transgender, who did not have surgery, correct?
Correct.
Michiko Bailey, the partner of an FTM, female-to-male transgender, Stephen Thorne, who is in our audience today, and Dr. Vernon Rosario, a UCLA clinical instructor of psychiatry who treats transgenders. Let's start with you, Jameson. Now, you decided to get surgery. Why?
I wanted to be legally male. That was one reason. And the other reason was I wanted this to be over. I didn't want to deal with feeling in between and having to worry if I was in some situation with all men that somebody was going to question me.
Now, that was your decision. But,
Right.
Nick, you've decided to stay in hormonal transition and not get surgery. Why is that?
I'm pleased that the hormone therapy that I've taken has allowed me to pass as male through my daily life, but I don't feel the need to have surgery on my body to sort of complete anything. I feel comfortable with my body the way it is.
Now, your partner, John, is here in the audience, and forgive me for going here, but you were born biologically a female.
Yes.
And you're living in a gay relationship with a male now.
Yes.
When you get undressed, you have a vagina. So how do you deal with that?
My partner loves me for who I am, and he loves the person that I am. And so what is private between us is private between us, but it's really about our relationship as people, not what body I have.
So it's not a matter of whether or not you're gay, but who you are as people. One of the things that, did I get that right, or is that
No,
not
I think that's right. I mean, I identify as a gay man, and that's how I identify inside, and that's how I feel, it's how I express myself, it's how I live in the world. It doesn't really matter what's underneath my clothes to make that a reality.
So sex and gender are different issues, as Renee points out a number of times.
Sex and gender are different issues, and then sexual orientation is different too, because sexual orientation is about who you're attracted to, and I happen to be attracted to other men, which makes me gay, because that's my sexual orientation, and gender identity is how I feel inside, which is male.
Michiko, your story is a little bit different. When you were in a lesbian relationship and it was found out that Stephen was transitioning, you were asked to leave the lesbian organization. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Why did they disapprove?
Because they didn't, you couldn't be with a man, and it didn't matter that the person was a female to male or a non-transsexual man. It didn't matter. If you were with a man at this present time, you couldn't be in the organization.
So
no matter that they loved me yesterday, today was a different story.
What's interesting to me is that the gay and lesbian community, which had been subjected to so much hardship and prejudice, so here we're hearing their prejudice too sometimes.
Sure.
Yeah. A lot of people don't realize that we are all female in our mothers until we're 3 months of age with a clitoris and a vagina. If testosterone then shows up, that clitoris becomes a penis, the vagina closes, and it becomes male. If an enzyme is missing or there's some other problem, then the person will be born female even if they have XY chromosomes. So in a sense, if you look at it this way and you realize that the surgeries really basically have the same material to work with.
The people, I think, in the film speak about this as being born in the wrong body or a birth defect that they need to have corrected. And I don't think all transgender people feel that way, that for some of us it's still a spiritual experience, that having the capacity and the ability to live as both genders in my lifetime has been a profoundly, life-changing, spiritual, profound experience for me, and I think it is for other transgender people as well.
What about your experience, Jameson?
I originally lived as some kind of androgyne.
Androgyne.
That's the only word I can think of. I was pretty much perceived as a little boy a lot of times, and I knew I had a female body. I knew if people asked me what sex I was supposed to say I was a girl. It was a big struggle for me. I was definitely transgendered as a child. I started refusing to wear dresses before I was 2. So, you know, it's not about who I wanted to have sex with. If that's how we classify what is a lesbian, based on sexual orientation, it wasn't about that. So,
What was it about?
I don't know. It's about how who I am. It's about what my soul is, what my psyche is.
You go ahead.
Before you were aware that you could transition, and in some ways I think it seemed like the lesbian community was the only place for you to go.
Nowhere else to go.
So you go there because you don't even know what options are available to you.
Right.
It's the way you feel in terms of your attraction. That's not about gender originally, and then later on you find
And I
more.
think that's why this panel and the films are so important, because until recently there were so few female-to-male transgender people in the media at all. One of the reasons I didn't transition until I was 34 is I didn't even know it was possible.
Right.
And I was well-educated, a queer activist, and I always knew that men became women, but I never knew it went the other way until I saw this gentleman in a documentary, and the light bulb literally went on over my head. So I think that's one reason why there are also fewer FTMs around, is because sometimes people just don't know that it's a possibility for them.
All right, well, Jameson, you've had the surgery. Is Nick any less of a man than you?
Not in my opinion, in any respect, or any less than you are. I'd also like to say that there are people who start out in female bodies who go through the lesbian community who end up as gay men. There are also people who start out as in female bodies who get married, have children, you know, think of themselves as heterosexual in that sense, struggle with their gender identity, think that they're going to become gay men if they transition, and find themselves not being gay men when they're
Some
on the other
people,
side.
they don't always find the end of the road is not always what they expect it to be.
Exactly, which says to me that we simply don't choose our sexual orientation.
I've also heard that some people feel as if they get pushed towards surgery when that's really not what they want, or they feel afterwards like they've made a mistake.
I think sometimes therapists can really do harm to patients by sort of simple-mindedly making a diagnosis and saying, like, okay, here's the full plan for treatment.
I think Stefan, Michiko's partner, has something to say.
I do, thank you. What this causes me to think about immediately is how our culture has most of its experience and makes most of its assumption based on binary gender structure of where there's only two. There must be male or female and nothing in between. And I think what we point up, our existence as transsexuals and transgender people points up, is that gender is actually a continuum. And there are many, many different identities along the continuum besides just male and female.
Renee and Juana have a discussion in the movie about whether or not they're married, and she says that because he married her as a woman and it was not legal in California at that point, that they were no longer married, and he agreed with that, although somewhat grudgingly. The laws are different in every state, I realize that. In some states you can change, in other states you can't. But is it simply a matter of a name change, or do you have to go and prove it? Do you have to show them that you've actually changed?
You pretty much have to have a doctor's affidavit that says that you have had procedures that confirm your gender.
Right, and speaking of doctors, there's another point I wanted to bring up, and that is that people need to go, this is not a law, but there is something called a real-life test when people have to live, an RLT it's referred to, where they have to live as the opposite sex, dress as the opposite sex, and take hormones before they can actually have the surgery. I showed Renee the movie, and one of his first reactions, people will be pleasantly surprised to hear, was, I had no idea I was so hard on Juana. Now, is that abusiveness that he was a matter of his need to protect himself and go through with what he had held inside? Or is it testosterone playing a role? Does the testosterone make you more aggressive? I see you laughing at me. You're laughing at the doctor, so it's not possible.
Well, testosterone is a very powerful hormone, and it does cause significant changes pretty quickly upon starting it. But it doesn't change you into the Incredible Hulk. You know, it is, you have choices about how you choose to express masculinity. And I think every man in the United States, whether they're transgender men or not transgender men, get to choose what kind of man they are. Are they super macho? Are they feminist? And I think every FTM man has a different way of expressing that masculinity. You know, mine is certainly different than Renee's.
It's also true that if you take hormones, it may not feel right to you. And some people think they want to be men. They take testosterone. They realize, no, this doesn't feel right. They back off. Most people who actually are seeking a hormonal solution, if it's right for them, it feels right. They feel more relaxed. They feel less stress. They end up not being as angry.
Coming back to the medical aspect of it that you were mentioning before about what happens in the embryo and all that kind of stuff, I mean, one of the most interesting things to me when I started testosterone was that my body knew what to do with it. It did not feel like putting some foreign substance into my body.
Right.
It went, oh, if you'd been born with XY chromosomes, this is what we would have done. We would have redistributed the fat, lowered the voice, bulked up,
Well, wait a
gotten
minute.
more hair.
Have you ever had your chromosomes checked?
No, I haven't.
So you
So I'm
don't know if you were
assuming that
born
I
with
have
XY.
XX. I
That's
know.
right.
Nobody knows unless you have them actually checked. But my body I began to look like my brother, look like my father. You know, it felt very natural, actually.
What, you know, you're bringing up chromosomes. What are the theories? Everybody who sees the movies asks, is it chromosomal? Is it chemical? Is it something that happens in the uterus? Is it emotional? What are the theories? And maybe even more important, what are each of your takes on why?
The reigning hypothesis is that it's somehow determined by hormone levels in utero at particular critical points in embryological development that change something in the brain, but we don't know.
You know, there's a question in the audience as well.
I'd be interested in hearing from the transsexual men what they found most surprising or most interesting when they were in their real identity that wasn't visible or they couldn't be aware of before.
I think I was surprised by how little I was surprised. I know that sounds strange, but actually somehow I suspected that once I started passing as male and was in space with men, I would discover that they had some secret language, secret society, some thing that I never heard when I looked like a woman. And it turned out to be not the case at all. I go to the barbershop and they talk about home remodeling, and it's so not, I don't feel like I'm treated that differently as a man than I was as a woman. And I know other FTMs experience that differently, and they feel like they are treated much differently as a man. But to me, maybe because I was such an androgynous woman all along, I don't feel like I've experienced life that much differently now. And that is what is most surprising to me, because I expected it to be a really cataclysmic difference.
Now, Renee talks about some very painful moments. What was the most painful moment in this transition for each of you?
Well, actually, a very painful moment for me was when my partner decided to leave me. And that made me into a weekend dad, which was not how I wanted to live. But I didn't have much choice. But another painful moment, which is answering the same question, is when I realized how fearful women really are of men. When I was in a female body, I didn't experience the kind of fear and avoidance things about men. I wasn't afraid of going out at night alone. I wasn't, those things didn't bother me. But when women actually began to turn that fear on me because they perceived me as a man, if I startled them at night or something, then I got how painful that was for them.
So the reaction of other people to you was painful because they were reacting differently to you.
In a way, not that, I mean, we're talking about strangers, it's not no one I'm going to have a relationship with, but it was just this sudden awareness of how deep that fear is, and I wanted to do something to alleviate that.
That fear goes so far as to cause a great deal of violence
Exactly.
as well. People
Right.
are very frightened of the violence. What about you, Nick? Your most painful moment?
I don't think, any parent really looks forward to the conversation where their child tells you that they're transgender. And I think that was probably the most painful moment.
Was that mom or dad?
Both.
How did they react?
Well, like I said, it's not something any parent really looks forward to hearing. But that being said, I think they've reacted very well, and they're very supportive, and they do the best that they can to understand.
How did you tell them?
I just sat them down and said, I never felt like a girl and could never really see myself. Not only did I never feel like a girl, I could never see myself growing up to become a woman. And therefore, that was impeding my ability to grow up because I couldn't see myself as a woman ever. And so I was staying in this kind of arrested, I was a graduate student until I was 29 because it was kind of a safe place to stay where I didn't have to become a grown-up woman. And so when I said to them, the only way I'm going to mature is to become a man because I know and I can become that. And that's what I said to them, that I have to do this so that I can become a grown adult and become the man I know I need to be.
Other question?
Yeah, Jameson, since you're now a male, can you still have an orgasm and can you still like reproduce?
Yes, I can absolutely have an orgasm. I am sterile, however. I don't have testicles that function in the same way as male testicles.
Is that like the same way with Nick as well? Like, can you still have a baby or how does that work?
No, the testosterone changes the ovaries, basically sort of shuts them down so that they don't produce eggs anymore. So I would not be fertile, but I can orgasm.
Now, Rene had his ovaries removed, and because he had been on testosterone for so long, his ovaries and uterus were this size because we saw them removed. They were that small. They had involuted at that point. Other questions?
I have a question. In the film, Rene, as we know, he's a devoted Christian and he attends church all the time. But on the other level, he says that he's a birth defect. It just seemed to me that somebody who was a Christian and believed in the Bible and believed in God, it would seem like a little arrogant to suggest that God made a mistake.
I think he's coming from a very fundamentalist background. There's nothing in the Bible that talks about gender variance or transsexualism at all. It talks a lot about homosexuality, though. Not a lot, but I mean, there's enough about homosexuality that that's the framework in which anyone in his world as a child could understand what was going on. And so he kept trying to say, no, that's not me, that's not me. And he had to come up with, because he didn't have contact with anyone else who experienced what he was feeling, the only language that he could come up with was what he came up with.
Do you see different levels or types of prejudice if there are in ethnic groups as well?
Well, I certainly think that there's racism. I think that FTMs of color react differently and have a whole different set of problems or issues or concerns than FTMs who aren't of color. We won't go to the South, and you know that's one big thing. And even though we live in the Bay Area, there's still issues and problems that we encounter. So certainly.
More than one prejudice you have to deal with, it seems
Yes.
like.
But also to
Yes, good.
get to your question, you know, culture influences how we experience and create models of gender and how we experience sexuality. So I work with Latino patients and African American teenagers who have a very different notion of how they should act on their gender than the sort of surgical model.
Many cultures don't have the language of transgender at all. They understand this in the context of homosexuality simply because that's the only language they have.
But in other cases, you have places like Brazil and Thailand where it's much more of a fixture and much more accepted.
Right.
Stephanie, you have a comment?
Actually, I had something that I was going to add when Michiko was talking regarding the ethnicity and how that impacts us in our relationship. Michiko being biracial, one of the places that we connect on a very deep level is her experience in life as a biracial person and the sense that she had of never really being totally accepted and never really fitting in on either side of her race makeup from her parents and her families. And my sense of not really fitting in or being fully accepted on either side of my gender or sex experience. And that's been a place where we've really been able to connect in our relationship and understand one another. We know how it feels, even though it's about different things.
Do you fit in? Now you fit in with each other, obviously. Do you fit in your community better than you did?
I do fit in better in my life, every day through life, especially with people who do not know me. I glide through life as a man without issues coming up. However, I transitioned on my job. I am an out transsexual, and a lot of people who know me know who and what I am, and there certainly have been ongoing issues of acceptance especially in my work. We have a locker room issue where I'm in shared space with other men. So there's a way that the acceptance is not the same. There's a way that my experience as a transsexual man is very different from the experience of men who are not transsexuals. And that is forever going to be different for me in my life.
Have you had problems like this yourself?
Not problems, I wouldn't say, but I mean, I certainly acknowledge that as a transgender man, I am different than a biological man or man born with a male body because I was raised as a girl. So I had this socialization of me as a female, but I don't mind that I bring that to my male self because to me it's kind of a nice combination. I think that females are socialized in many ways around communication and interpersonal relationships that are different than males. So he's right, I'll never be a male the way my partner is a male, but I like the kind of man I am as well, knowing that I have certain different experiences in history.
Which locker room?
Well, I am the most non-athletic person you'll ever meet, so locker rooms don't come up a lot in my life. But I would have to go, well, definitely to the men's room. If I tried to go into a woman's locker room or the women's bathroom, they would call the police and security. So it's definitely, I have to choose men's.
What would happen if you went into the men's bathroom, though, and I realized that you might not be in a position where you were seen, but if you were and somebody discovered it, you think they might react?
Frankly, I do have fears about, violence being perpetrated on me as a transgender person because that happens, and I can, Brandon Tina being a famous example, but it happens a lot. But in some ways, I am not nervous in the men's room because men in men's rooms keep their eyes on the floor, don't talk to each other, don't pay attention. So I often feel like in the men's room, I'm completely invisible, and I'd be less likely to be attacked there than anywhere else.
But what about you?
I don't have any problems.
At this point, but before you went through the surgery?
Before I went through the surgery, I thought because I had a female body, I was supposed to use women's rooms, and I got in a lot of trouble that way. I developed a lot of coping behaviors, trying to be nice and sweet and raise the pitch of my voice and look non-threatening. When I transitioned to male, I realized I had to let go of those behaviors because they were going to get me in a lot of trouble as a man.
A lot of people try to do what is expected of them, spend a long time in pain because of that.
Right.
I think
and not just transgender people. I mean, I think our society, as Stefan pointed out, is very clear about gender roles for everyone. And so all little boys, I think, spend a lot of time figuring out how they're supposed to be as a boy, and all little girls figure out how they're supposed to be as a little girl. And I think if people reflected on that, they'd realize it. It's just transgender people, it's a little bit more acute.
It sounds from everybody's story that a lot of this is about what's expected of us, whether it's about gender or sex. A lot of us spend time trying to live up to other people's expectations and keep secrets as a result of that and live in pain. Hopefully, we can help change that for some people. You don't have to keep your secrets anymore. I want to thank everybody on the panel for sharing your own experiences and your advice, and everybody in the audience today. Whether people feel they've been born into the wrong bodies because of misdirected hormones, undiscovered chemicals, as yet invisible chromosomal changes, or even buried emotional problems, we do know some things. Whatever path they choose, most people who feel they've been born into the wrong body live with their secrets for years. When they reveal their feelings, they're exposed to ridicule, prejudice, abuse, even violence. In 1973, being gay was considered a mental illness. It is no longer that way. Is transgenderism the next boundary? Remember, Renee said, so many people don't realize how lucky they are that their outsides and insides match. What if every day, feeling like the man or woman you are, you looked in the mirror and you saw the opposite sex? You might not care about the cause, just the solutions. Maybe there are no answers, only choices. I think that's what it really amounts to.